It was fascinating the kinds of things that were consistent across intelligent species. In fact, some xenopsychologists had dedicated their lives years to studying this very phenomenon, some able to speculate, but none able to create a cohesive theory as to why these things existed almost universally across the galaxy. One theorist managed to complete a doctorate on what they broke down into the description of a dingy, dirty, smelly, sticky, floored, hole-in-the-wall kind of place that served both legal and underlegal intoxicants to one of two kinds of clientele: individuals that are less than reputable, or individuals that are very lost and soon to be robbed. Theses aside, it was in just one of these places that Jim Bloom found himself throwing two of humanity's greatest contributions to the galactic economy, six-sided die. A small crowd of onlookers gathered around him that in any other place might be kindly described as criminals, and more safely described at a distance. All watched intensely as the dice bounced and tumbled across the green hollow table and came to a stop, showing the wonderful total of 2. They all erupted in equal parts excitement and horror, the squeals, snorts and shouts blending together to all remind Jim of the mistake he had just made. Now I might be wrong, Bloom, but isn't that the lowest possible score on these human dice, correct? The Octonian spluttered as he reached his 6 tentacles out and drew in all of Bloom's credit discs. Why yes, Gardel, it is, Jim spat, downing the last of his drink before spinning on his heels. Having to grab the table to steady himself didn't do much to enhance his dignity as he continued wobbling away with as much stability he could muster after losing everything to that damned Octonian. Again. The small crowd continued to jeer. Some slapped him on the back encouragingly as he made his way to the washroom where he unzipped his fly and aimed before. Earth to Jim, Bloom, are you alright? Had a few too many, huh? Whoa, what, huh? Jim managed to reply as he took in his surroundings. Where was he? Why was his dick in his hand? He tried to shake off the confusion as his Marvolian friend hit his arm with his clawed hand. You scared me there, man. You were just looking off into nothing for like a couple minutes. You alright? The larger Marvolian looked down at him in concern, its big yellow eyes set into its furry blue and white face, fangs jutting around its lips, even as it did its best to look unthreatening to its inebriated friend. Jim looked up at the furred, lion-like creature, his mind informing him of various nerve clusters and hand-to-hand techniques for quickly taking down a larger foe before he shook his head clear and came back to his senses. What the hell was that? Yeah, Jarl, I'm right. Just spaced out for a second there. That was weird. Had a bit too much soft skin. I don't want to carry you back again tonight. Jim let his old friend get away with the insult that would see others quickly finding out just how soft human knuckles can be. Had he had too much? Honestly, he felt completely sober, something that should be impossible considering what he had been drinking all night. The Octonians might have been instinctually abhorrent, but they made some strong drinks. Being sober was equal parts annoying and useful. On one hand, he had wasted all those credits getting himself as under-sober as possible. On the other, he was now clear-minded enough to follow his orders. Whoa, what the hell? Orders? Huh? Charles said, taking a step back. I didn't give you any orders, man. You can do what you want. No, not you. Just don't worry about it. I gotta go. He finally managed to put himself away and pushed past his friend back into the bar, the music thumping loud as ever, and the crowd on the dance floor heaving as one, making it hard to push through to the bar. Once there, his eyes swept the room and started to log the possible dangers and allies. As he did, he locked onto the other humans, who to his surprise he saw were doing the same thing as he was. A subtle nod to each was all the communication they needed before they all moved to an empty booth and sat down together. There were 2 other men and 2 women, all dressed for a night of drinking and all looking as sober as a priest. Jim spoke first. Do you guys have any idea what's going on? The woman on the left answered with confidence. It must be the war training modules. Humanity must be at war, and we've just received our training. What are your orders? The Jim went to answer, but the man to his left beat him to it. Group with other humans, attain a human ship and report to the nearest human shipyard for outfitting and further orders. They all nodded in agreement. Right, she said over the din of the music. I guess we better do that then. It became clear that this woman in her black cocktail dress and thick black eyeliner considered herself their superior. This fact annoyed Jim Bloom more than it should have. His namesake not being just coincidence but in fact showed his blood relation to his uncle, the High General of Earth, and here was this short, makeup-ridden, cocktail dress wearing woman taking charge like it was her prerogative. Sure, she looked a little bit older than his 24 years, but she still had to be under 30. Definitely no reason to be in charge. Just, what is it you'll be doing, humans? Her voice blurbled out behind the group. They all turned as one, and Jim noted the credit-stealing Octonian Drebel, now flanked by 2 other imposing-looking tentacled faces. Normally they would be intimidating figures with how they towered a foot taller than the tallest average human and were broad to match. What was distressing Jim, though, was how his mind was already showing each and every weak point of a male Octonian and how 5 humans could best work together to quickly take them down. Without a word to each other, the group smoothly slid into a V formation with the mouth of the V either side of the Octurnians as though to snapshot around them. The lack of emotion on the humans' faces was what made the larger foe first start to doubt themselves. They'd interacted enough to know that eye contact was normal with humans, and looking at their bodies was a threat. Only one human, the small female, was looking at their eyes. The other 4 were looking back and forth between their arms, fists and knees. Their self-appointed leader spoke to the 3's leader calmly. "We were just leaving. May we please get past?" She locked eyes and held them unwavering. "Who is this female human?" Drebel thought to himself. "How dare she not be afraid of me? And why is she staring at me?" He also knew enough that too much eye contact was its own kind of threat in human cultures. He was first to break eye contact and look around at the humans surrounding him. And to his astonishment, he felt fear towards humans for the first time in his long life. Jim too was scared, but not of Drebel or his friends. He was scared of himself. Constantly running through his mind were different scenarios as to how to take these 3 down in varying levels of brutality. It even gave him plans to take them out on his own, but that required far more damage to each one and much higher risk. So far, it had only given him less than lethal options. But he felt the lethal options floating at the edge of his mind, just waiting to be remembered if the situation called for it. He didn't know what the lethal options were yet, and he really didn't want to find out. He needed to do something to defuse the situation. The Octurnians were all focused on the woman at the head of their V formation, so they had to turn to look at him when he cut in. "Please, Drebel, we just want to leave. We don't want any trouble." The words left his mouth just as he realized it was exactly the wrong thing to say. "Trouble?" Drebel spat, turning to face him. What kind of trouble could some tiny humans cause? His burbling was cut off by the movements of the 2 other men in their party who Jim still didn't know the names of. As though they were coordinated, they both leaned back and kicked their right legs out on either side of Drebel's body, one kicking in his stomach and the other his back. Octurnian biology was different from humans. For one, they were invertebrates. Their large bodies held up with many strong muscles and external shell plates. Also, unlike humans, their heart-like organs were lower and more akin to sacs that inflated and deflated to pump a saline solution the Octurnians had as blood. All this information combined meant that a forceful, concentrated kick on either side of an Octurnian's stomach and back effectively worked to pop their heart and send the overpressured saline blood out of their weaker orifices. In reality, this means their eyes burst as they fall to the ground dead and puking up blue blood. The training apparently wasn't immune from human shock, the only thing to save his life being the small woman pulling him out of the way of the right Octurnian's blade before Jim's own hands reached up and redirected the blade's swipe back into the creature's own throat. It happened so fast, like he wasn't even in control of himself, as he felt the woman behind him shove him forward and over the 3 bodies. How had the other one died? "We need to get out of here," she shouted as other shouts and screams erupted from around them. Thunderous footsteps could be heard coming for them as Jim took control of himself for the first time. "No, not that way. Follow me." And he darted away from the quickly clogging front exit and towards the washrooms. The others followed in his wake and all ran into the washroom as Jim opened the window and hopped out, falling into the alley behind. The others soon followed and ran after him, the towering buildings blocking the way either side of them. "Where's a human ship?" he shouted to the woman. "Freight yard, loading dock 3. My ship's there, and I'd like to point out that we're heading in the wrong direction." "Ah, she's a captain. That made her natural authority make sense." "Okay, I know this city. Follow me." Jim led them down the darkened alley before slowing his pace as it opened up to a bustling market street with vendors of every kind placed haphazardly everywhere they could find space. As they strode past, dodging the crowds of buyers, the sellers shouted out to entice them to buy everything from clothing, illegal plants, exotic animals. You name it, there were hundreds of people of every kind of alien race milling about and looking at the wares, none paying much mind to the group of humans who made their way through quickly. "We are heading in the wrong direction," the woman whisper shouted at him. "My name is Jim, and no we are not. Well, yes we are, but not for long." She just huffed angrily and continued to follow him, the others in tow closely behind. After a couple more minutes of wading through the crowd's minute, he finally saw what he was looking for. The bright red sign with a bowl of green noodles and a pink broth hung off the side of the towering building and enticed guests inside. Though the Xeno food shop wasn't exactly his target, he rounded the first corner after the sign, and yes, he was still there. "Cleary, wake up, I've got a fare," Jim said, opening the craft's door and allowing the others to pour in behind him. "What the hell, man? You can't just wake a man like that." The Stunian squawked, his chicken-like beak chattering in annoyance even as it started its craft up and flicked a switch on its roof. A screen flashed with the words "Fare 100" that slowly began ticking up even though they hadn't moved yet. 100 credits. "What kind of robbery is this?" Eyeliner lady said in disgust. "Don't like it you can. It let out a loud squawk that made them all grimace in disgust when they heard their comms attempt to interpret it. The woman went to slap the pilot, but Jim grabbed her hand in time as the bird creature laughed to itself, as its barely flying craft took off in much the same way a chicken doesn't, throwing them all back into their seats and taking their breath away. It was a good few seconds of high acceleration before the driver eased into one of the flight travel lanes, let off the throttle and turned around. "So what'd you do this time, Jim?" "I've been hearing some strange chatter about a bar fight going down." "That wouldn't have anything to do with you, now it? You know I charge extra for that." It squawked as Jim tried to figure out what to tell his sort of friend that would get them to the freight yard and not on Cleary's bad side. "We, ran into trouble, yeah. My cheap friend here has a ship in the freight yard. Can you get us there?" Quietly? Jim looked at his sort of friend, who stared back at him for a moment as Jim tried to convey the severity of the situation through the look he gave. Cleary looked over at the other occupants and seemed to notice they were all human for the first time. "You know, I've been hearing other things on the broadcaster too." Jim swallowed hard as Cleary continued. "Bad things. There's even talk of war." Jim looked up and held the Stellion's stare, not wavering. It was Cleary who broke first, his gaze settling back out the front window. "Do you know much about my people's history, Jim?" Cleary reached up and flicked the switch that Jim knew did two things. The first became apparent immediately as the fare jumped from 250 to 750 in one go, causing Kim to splutter something before Jim could make her stop. The other thing that switch did was disconnect Cleary's ship's transponder and activated its heat sinks, effectively making it invisible to the city's navigation sensors. All their stomachs lurched when he cut power to drop silently out of his flight path and into a freefall before being crushed against their seats as Cleary re-engaged engines to fly low and silently, swooping between buildings like his flightless ancestors dreamed they could. "Do us Sternians a favor, will you? Send those slimy mother squawkers back to the sea